Good morning or afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I'm Stephen Henry Madoff, the founding chair of the master's program in curatorial practice at the School of Visual Arts in New York. And every Wednesday, I have the pleasure of hosting the Curatorial Roundtable, which brings distinguished curators and directors of institutions to speak about their practice. Today, my guest is Bernardo Mosqueira. And I'm just going to read a short bio for Bernardo. And then the order of business is that Bernardo will present for about 50 minutes. At that time, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see Q&A. Please type your question or comment into the Q&A, not into chat, but into the Q&A. And with that, I'll just read a little bit of Bernardo's history. I know he's going to start by speaking a bit about his curatorial journey. So Bernardo is the founder and artistic director of Solar dos Abacaxis in Rio de Janeiro since 2015 and the director of Prêmio FOCO ArtRio since 2012. He's the former chief curator of the Institute for Studies on Latin American Art, ISLAA in New York. Between 2021 and 2023, Bernardo was the ISLAA Curatorial Fellow at the New Museum, where he curated 7 exhibitions. In 2020, he co-founded Fundo Colaborativo, the first emergency fund for artists and art workers in Brazil. In 2017, he received the Premio Lorenzo Bonaldi per Arte, an international award for young curators organized by GAMeC in Bergamo, Italy. A long list of exhibitions. I'm not going to go through them all. I'll just add in 2021, Bernardo was part of the curatorial team for the 5th New Museum Triennial Softwater Hard Stone. And in 2023, he was named by Apollo Magazine as, quote, one of the 10 most inspirational thinkers living in the US in their 40 under 40 list. In 2025, Bernardo was awarded the Vilcek Foundation Prize in Curatorial Work. And with that, I hand it over to you. Welcome, Bernardo.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Stephen, for your words and for this invitation. It's always amazing to be here with you, and you can always count on me. So yeah, as Stephen was saying, my name is Bernardo Mosqueira. I'm the artistic director of Solar dos Abacaxis. Solar is this institution dedicated to experimentation on art and education in Rio. It started as something really, really small, as a collective occupying the ruins of this big house in between the forest and the city. And little by little, throughout this last decade, it became this full institution with beautiful headquarters, exhibition space, program for kids, education for artists, a robust public program, artist residencies, artist studios. We're opening a new library in a few weeks, and it's definitely one of the most beautiful adventures of my life, and I'm going to show you a little bit about it. But in the past, for more than 6 years now, I have been living here in the US. I moved here initially to do a master's at CSS Bard, which was great. And as soon as I graduated, I started working at the new museum, as Stephen was saying, and I was very lucky to encounter amazing colleagues, and especially Margot Norton, who I know was here a few weeks ago and spoke about the triennial. That was really a gorgeous project, and I'm happy that I was able to work with her and Jamila James. And also the leadership in general, Massimiliano Johnny, Lisa Phillips, they were very supportive of my work, and I was able to do a lot there. I'm going to show a little bit here. And I left the new museum directly to become chief curator at ISLAA, which is this institute dedicated to supporting visibility and study on Latin American art in the US. I joined the institute just before, in the moment that they were preparing to open a new headquarters in Tribeca. And we were able to do a lot there, and I worked at ISLAA until a couple of months ago. And this invitation, Stephen, was very timely somehow, because I feel that I'm in a particularly reflexive moment. We are preparing for the 10th anniversary at Solar, so I'm really immersed in these archives and memories and narratives. So to have this moment to try out somehow a new way of telling this story, it's quite exciting. You asked me, Stephen, to tell a little bit about how I became a curator, how I initiated my curatorial practice, and I'll go through it really, really quickly, but because it was somehow, I don't know. I actually was I was studying mechanical engineering. I wanted to be a mechanical engineer. I don't know why, but I decided to do this course on art and philosophy in this art school called Parquilage with Annabella Geiger, the amazing artist who's now 1992 or 93 years old, and nowadays a great friend, but was my first art teacher. And Fernando Cocchiarali, a curator there in Rio. And there was an exercise in this class in which Annabella invited me to write about an exhibition in town. I wrote about this exhibition. I read this text in the classroom, and she said in front of everyone, "You have to quit mechanical engineering. You have to be a curator and an art critic." And Fernando Cocchiarali said, "Welcome, my colleague." And somehow I believed in them, and I quit mechanical engineering and decided to study social communication, something between theory and journalism. And in my first semester, I started working at the Modern Art Museum as a trainee in the communication department. And as my family, it's a working class family, has no relationship to the arts. I didn't know exactly what was a curator, At the museum, I was able to see the art system from all the different perspectives. And as I started growing with my own generation of artists too, and I quit the museum. I left the museum after a couple of years to do my first show. And something that I would say, and I never waited for an opportunity to come. I was always like trying to find something, conspire something with the artists. So my first exhibition, I was 21 years old, occupying this house, and I invited the artists to discuss freedom. It was an exhibition called "Freedom is Not Enough. What I Desire has yet no name." And I invited these 44 artists to contribute works for this exhibition that would last just for a few days occupying this house, this empty house. And it was amazing. And it's somehow very interesting to notice so many years after that. And, I have been working a lot since this first year. I have been doing from 7 to 11, 12 shows every year. So this is 100, I don't know how many shows, 70 only at Solar. And looking back, I see that I have been researching the same thing since the beginning somehow, because most part of my shows and of the exhibitions that I created and the institutions that I organized is somehow around the ideas of freedom, transgression, transformation, often crossed by issues such as sexuality, spirituality, knowledge transmission, epistemologies, gender, race, and knowledge transmission, cultural exchange, translation. And I hope to show you a little bit about that here. Instead of focusing on a few shows and going really deep on each of them, I chose to show many shows and just talk about the most important or singular gestures in their stories. Because for me, more interesting than thinking about what in this context, right? In this context for us here, more interesting than think about what curatorial practice should be, is to think about what it can yet become. So I'll show how in different moments I gave different responses to this. So let's go. All right, and this is not going to be chronological. I'm going to go back and forth from different times and different geographies, starting in Bergamo in Italy. Premio Lorenzo Bonaldi per Arte is an award for young curators that happens in Bergamo at GAMeC every 2 years, just before the Venice Biennial. It's an award for young curators, and in 2017, I was awarded by in this, I think this is the 15th edition of Premio Lorenzo Bonaldi, if I'm not wrong. And as part of the award, you develop a show at GAMeC. And at that moment, actually, since a few years before that, I was really involved in research and activism around immigration and refugees, especially from 2015, 14-15 on, after the Syrian war and the refugee crisis that was happening a lot in Europe, but also in Brazil. And in Brazil, we were receiving a lot of refugees from Congo, from Haiti, from Syria, etc. And I'll show you how I was involved in that somehow. But in that context, when I was awarded this show in Bergamo, and Bergamo in Italy was seeing this the far right anti-immigration movements growing a lot. Bergamo has this big prison there that is 70-80% composed of incarcerated immigrant men, especially. So I decided to make a show highlighting the power of the migrant body, the power of the foreign subjectivity, starting from our research on Afro-Brazilian spirituality in Candomblé, which is my religion, and I'll speak a little bit more about that, and seeing how the African diaspora was able to build Brazil as an African country outside of Africa, across the Atlantic, and that these 4 million people that were kidnapped and brought to Brazil between the 16th and the 19th century arrived in Brazil without any material elements, just the body, and the body being able to transmit and transform culture. Thinking about that, I decided to make this, and about this context that I described, I decided to make a show putting together 17 artists who lived far from their birthplaces as immigrants, refugees, expats, nomads, etc. The show really the show happened in this space called Espacio Zero, which is a space at GAMeC that used to be a church. So I decided to overlap somehow the church with the terreiro. Terreiro is the candomblé house. And in candomblé houses, it's very common to have these straw mats, taboas, straw mats, in which people are invited to sit and lay down. And somehow this is one of these strategies that I use a lot in exhibitions to how to change the temporal experience of people. When I was very young, I don't know, 20-something years old, I read this research describing that people would spend less than 3 seconds in front of each works in big museums, and that really stayed with me. And since then, I've been creating different strategies to make people stay longer in the exhibition spaces, and that was one of them. The exhibition invited people to sit and lay down and really understand their own bodies as enchanted bodies, and also consider these sculptures, these objects, as vibrant bodies that are alive, that know, and invited people to be part of this circular formation, right? And there we had from Daniel Stigman, Maria Loboda, Rodrigo Hernandez, Carlos Mota, Carolina Caicedo, who later had her Atrium Commission at MoMA, and Anawana Haloba, who's at the Berlin Biennial right now, Alia Farid, Yanvo, Meshaga Bata, and Bruguera. It's a really, really strong group of artists, and part of this, and it really worked. It was nice to see, going back there, to see that people would actually spend time sitting down, meditating. And part of the educational program of this show, it was very interesting, happened actually at the prison of Bergamo. We have also Hage Young, who also had an Atrium Commission at MoMA. And we can see that around the room, there are these basil plants. Basil is actually an African plant that became so important in Italian culture. It's an African plant, sacred in Candomblé, used in rituals, and was also part of the spiritual and invisible strategies that were organizing this space. Now I go back to 2015 in Rio, in Encruzilhada. It was the amazing Congolese Brazilian curator Lisete Linhado had just moved to Rio, was invited to be the director of this art school, the same art school where I was describing this my first experience with Annabella Geiger. And she arrived there with a very ambitious and gorgeous projects for the school. And part of it, there was a program called the Visiting Curator, Curador Visitante, in which she invited 5 curators to make shows engaging well-established artists that are already working in institutions and galleries, etc., with artists who were students in the school. I was the youngest of these 5 curators, so I was pushed to be the first, and the first curator had to put this show together in like 2.5 months, 3 months. And that was, I felt that I was put in a crossroads. And when Lisete asked me what I wanted to research, I said, I think I want to research the crossroads. The crossroads, the encruzilhada, as an ontological state, that we're always in it. And as part of the strategies to research the idea of encruzilhada, the idea of the crossroads, I decided to go through 3 main ways of research there. First, of course, philosophy, critical theory. The second one, linguistics. So making some linguistics exercises to get closer and closer to a certain definition or idea of encruzilhada. And the third one was candomblé, this form of Afro-Brazilian spirituality, especially in this show, Yoruba Brazilian spirituality. So as part of the process for the research and the development of this show, I went to see the oracle. It's not exactly that, but the Mãe de Santo, the spiritual leader who plays búzios, like cowrie shells, and can speak with the orishas. And I went to talk to her. It's Mãe Beata de Manjá, incredible spiritual leader, also an artist, also an activist. She passed a few years ago, and it was amazing. And when she started accessing the oracle, I told her I'm doing a show about the encruzilhada, and she just got a paper and a pen and started drawing. So this is the entrance of the show, and this is the first path. And then she started drawing the map of Parque Lage, where this show was going to happen, and that was mind-blowing. But she also said some things. She said, if it is encruzilhada, it is... So this is Ave Parque Lage. I know, it's insane. Rio is insane. I definitely recommend. And this is the art school that I was talking about. And she started to describe that, right? And she said, if it is the encruzilhada, it is connected to Exu, the orisha of the paths and crossroads, and of movement, transformation, exchange, the market. And if it is a shoe, it cannot be still. It needs to have movement. So I created this system that I was constantly rehanging the show, changing the organization of the show, making this big performance program, and to be always changing the space. If it is a shoe, the house of the shoe has no walls. So I understood that the show could not happen only inside of the house, but also in the garden, in the forest, in the waterfall, in the pool, in the tower, so everywhere, kind of as if there were no walls. If it is encruzilhada, it needs to give the sensation of a crossroad, so not knowing how to engage with it. So I created this display that was very experimental and always changing. This is me and Lisete in front of Regina Parra's work. Regina now lives in New York too. This was the first work that you would find, just made by this with these stones and this cupinzeiro. Paulo Lanzaré, this work, we commissioned this work for this show, and now it's part of the Inhotim collection. I'm gonna try to go quick because we have a lot to go through. And also one of the examples of how these hangings could happen. Sometimes we have here Cildo Meirelles, Valtércio Caldas, Jack Lerner, etc. And also these conceptual gestures of this is not a wall, this is an open path. And something that Mãe Beata also told me that day was, from the Yoruba Brazilian perspective, there is no metaphor. So this show is not going to be as a crossroads. It's not going to be about a crossroads. It's going to be a crossroads itself. And it actually was for me in many different ways. And in one of them, in the very last day or in the last days of the show, Marina Pérez Simão, incredible painter, and a friend of mine, introduced me to Adriano Carneiro de Mendonça, saying, Adriano, Bernardo really wants to open an art space. Bernardo Adriano is one of the sons of one of the 13 heirs or owners of this big ruin of a house, and I think you should meet each other. Just to give a little bit of context here, I had the sensation at that time that there were some kinds of artists and some kinds of artistic practice that had no space in the art scene at that time. Of course, I'm talking about Black, indigenous, trans, queer artists, but also artists who had weird practices, who had experimental practices that could not be included or that would not receive resources, any kind of resources or space or time or care from commercial galleries or museums at that time. So I wanted to open a space, but I thought it would be a small room in an office building downtown, 2x2. I had no money at all. But then Marina introduced me to Adriano. We went to visit this house. This is a historical photo when it was brand new. That's not how we found it. And it was a big house. It had no doors, no windows that would close, no electricity, no water in the pipes, but it had an incredible garden. It had a piece of forest at the back, and it had a very strong spiritual force too. It had a water fountain inside of a cave. And the first time we came to visit this house, it's still in 2000, in the middle of 2015. I saw these stairs and I had a vision. And it was the vision of this group of kids wearing a school uniform, walking down the stairs after public program. Well, it felt really impossible, but I really saw it. At that time, as I was saying, we had no money, we had no resources, but we had the artists, and we were very close to them. So I'll go back to this. I'm gonna go forward and come back and come back. We had no money at all. So what we decided to do was to make, and we had no structure, right? No safety to have a show open for a long time. So we decided to make these one-day shows that would last for one day, and we would make a new show every Thursday. So we would install the generator, unroll the cables, install the light, install the show, install any kind of structure, porta parties, and make a show that would last for one day. This would make people come to the space, the old ladies from the neighborhood, the kids from the schools, the queer folks, the club kids, the artists, everybody at the same time. And it was such a beautiful mix because everybody needs to be there at the same time seeing the shows, and it made the space. And I'll go back to this, because the fact that these shows would last just for one day actually made the artists feel really free to be really experimental. So they could try out new things. They could show things that they were not sure about. They could go really, really, really crazy to try out in their, in their own community, how people would react to it, or to show things that were really fresh. So it made the space really vibrant. But of course, made us crazy because one show every week was crazy. And how would we do it? We would make a show, we would make an opening, we would sell beers, and the beers from one week would fund the exhibition for the following week. And then little by little, the shows start growing, the money start growing a little bit more, and then the shows started happening every 2 weeks and every month, and just like that. And then people then we learned how to fundraise, which is something that I love doing and had to learn how to do. And to build what it is nowadays, which is dozens of people working as part of the team or as collaborators with 3 boards, etc. We had to learn how to do it. But at the very beginning, without anything, any kind of structure, the very first program we did was about was inspired by this work by Antonio Dias. This was the very first work we showed at Solar. It's called Do It Yourself Freedom Territory. It was a work made during the military military dictatorship in Brazil, but also informed by this, but also informed by 1968 in Europe. Antonio Dias makes this gesture saying, do it yourself, freedom territory, enough of representation. This is the moment of action and you are responsible for it. Somehow, this is the first work that we installed at Solar. And somehow we made Solar in response to it. The work said, do it yourself, freedom territory, and we made Solar as a freedom territory, having this as a principle and a fundament. And a quick spoiler alert, now in December, we're making our 10th anniversary exhibition at Solar, and we are reinstalling this work, but now in another context, in a show about critical institutional critique, institutional imagination, institutional building, thinking about, this is another story. But at that moment, just after we installed this work, taking advantage of this moment of Rio in 2016, so it was the Olympic Games, people from all over the world were there. So we decided to discuss a global issue that was happening at that time, which was migration and refugee crisis. So we made this 6 months long program in partnership with the United Nations Agency for Refuge and Caritas, which is the organization that welcomes refugees in Brazil. And as part of this program, we developed, because in Solar, we developed all these kind of different ways of experiencing art and education that are not exhibitions, conventional exhibitions and conventional seminars. So Fuzuere is one of these formats, which is a kind of an exhibition or a program developed by artists for kids and with kids. So we invited 10, 15 artists who made proposals for kids. And in the very first edition, it was for the refugee kids. More than 60% of the refugees arriving in Brazil at that time were refugees. So we made this big, beautiful program for kids, which and we still do every year. Around September, October, we do a new Fuzuere. Manjar is another format that we created at that time, precisely this one, exhibitions that would last for one night. And we were able to do really beautiful projects and to really grow with a generation at the same time that we were also looking outside and finding ways to collaborate with artists that were not from Rio, trying to create bridges between margins. The shows had no titles. They were Manjar and then the name of the artist. Some of them didn't even have texts, but the works were discussing something specific. And more than the works, the format of Manjar was not only putting together artists, like visual artists or contemporary artists, but also musicians, DJs, people producing like chefs or people producing food. But every single one of these elements were thought as a contribution to an experience of thinking together. So if it was a show, for example, here in fictional case, if it was a show about feminism, it would be like a group of feminist artists, and then this feminist chef working with the feminist visual women, and then feminist performer, and all of them, and each of these contributions were thought, considered, and engaged as different ways of thinking together from different perspectives. This is one of these examples I show with Carlos Machel, Cuban artist based here in New York. This is the object that was used in this performance. Later, we donated this work to the Museum of Art of Rio. Carlos Mota, Colombian. It's funny to look into that, because 2017, I had no idea that I would live one day in New York, and that Carlos Martial and Carlos Mota would be great friends. And Jaime Laureano, another artist who grew up with us a lot, gorgeous artist. I'll go quick through these examples. This was a show on the relationship between the artist, the artist painting, and the urban landscape. So we were always putting together artists from different contexts, different positionalities. So here we had Lúcia Laguna, this genius, one of the most important painters in Brazil, who started painting when she was like 60 something years old, and quickly became one of the most important painters in Brazil with this gorgeous work painting. Since then, from the same place in her studio, engaging with her garden and the urban the workshop, the garden, the studio, the garden, and the urban landscape, with these paintings with many layers, with a lot of memory. In the middle, we have Tantão, this artist who would often walk on the paint on the streets, or walk on the streets with his paintings, or painting on objects that he would find on the streets, with this very material connection to the urban landscape. And on the left side, we have Maxwell Alexandre. In one of his first exhibitions in his life, amazing artist from Rio and painter from Rocinha. Maxwell Alexandre last year had a solo show at the Shed here in New York, had a solo show at the Palais de Tokyo, and those are some of these artists who we were together since the very beginning. Maxwell Alexandre, who gave us this honor, right? Or another example of this other show, Les Mira made us find a way to get tons and tons of soil to hide 5 pieces of gold in the middle and make people react to it. Among the Queiroz, this was a show about how we could be tricked by, we could think that something is gold but it's not, we could think that something is valued but it's not. So it was a show that invited us to doubt ourselves a lot. Armando Queiroz from Belém in the Amazon, gorgeous work called Midas, in which this golden mouth with these bugs coming out is one of the examples of how we explored also the forest and the garden in these exhibitions. Dayson Gilbert, and in this show we also had Karima Shadu, this amazing artist based in London, who last year won of the awards of the Venice Biennial. This is one that I really love. It's a show that was based in a fiction story that I wrote with this curator Bernardo de Souza. As we were doing these shows of one night, we really could do some experimental and crazy gestures like that. The show was based in this story that this spring that exists in the deep of this cave in the garage of Solar, in this first headquarters, somehow exploded, and this swirl, in this twist, would spread pieces of the past, present, and future, before, after, and now, throughout the space. So the show was in the pit dark and had this lighting system that would shed light on parts of the show at the same time, and then it would change. So you could see only part of the show, and then it would show you another part of the show. Sometimes it would show the entire show, but it was constantly showing it a different show in the same space. There was this smoke in the show. It was the work of an artist who transformed a diamond into this smoke that was constantly being thrown in the space. So there was the light, there was this smoke, and the works were gorgeous. It was very phantasmagoric. Vivian Kakuri made this. We used this old Steinway piano for the sound installation. Anna Francischini from Milano is there too. We used one of the pineapples that gave the name of the institution, Solar dos Abacaxis. Abacaxi means pineapple, because this house in the old days had 14 pineapples in the facade. Most of them were like broken stones, etc. But we made models of some of them and used some of them as part of the exhibition in this show. And this is Tadaskia, also one of her first shows. Last year had a solo show at MoMA, gorgeous solo show. Also an artist who gave us the honor of growing together. I'll go quickly through it. We spent more than 5 years trying to buy this house and finding different ways, fighting in the law. I know everything about renting laws, about real estate, because we really had to learn about it. And we were constantly engaging our community, going to the newspapers saying that we were trying to buy the house, etc. And in one of these gestures, one of the last ones, Para Habitar Liberdades, the show that I curated with Kane and Layson, we decided to open the entire house to show people, to people what we could do there. And this is, Mulheres Criando, Sônia Gomes, Arlindo, Elza Lima from the Amazon, Ana Cláudia Almeida, who has a solo show here in New York right now, Annabella Geiger, who I mentioned already twice. And as these shows would last only for one day, we could do things like showing a meta schema by Elliot Sika in a really wet cave, from one night. I'm pretty sure that no one was able to do that or would do that. But it was really beautiful. Reconhecimento was a show that wasn't created by me. It was created by my team. I was already living in New York, but engaging with a very strong network of indigenous artists in Brazil. This is Jade Isbel, Denilson Banil, not only indigenous artists, but artists dealing with the reconnection to land and territory, indigenous territory. This is Carolina Caicedo too. Edgar Calel, probably one of the most shown works in this past years. Genius was shown in Solar in 2016. Now it's part of not part, but it is at Tate, but as a concession, not as owned, which is another story. Until we get to the moment of the pandemic, I was already here in New York, and we decided to stop everything we were doing. As I was at BART, I was working a lot with some Chinese colleagues and curators, and they were saying, "Look, something's gonna come. We need to be ready." And I created this internal study group at Solar, and so when the pandemic arrived in Brazil, really we were already really familiarized somehow with the crisis and thinking about what we could do. And what we decided to do was to stop everything and transform Solar into this machine of gathering resources and distributing resources. So we created Fundo Colaborativo, the first emergency funds for the arts and artists and art workers in Brazil. It was initiated by Solar, and then later we decided to engage other nonprofits, not other art spaces in Brazil, in São Paulo, like Casa do Povo and Pivot, in Belo Horizonte, as Jaca and Mau Mau, in Recife and Chão, in São Luís do Maranhão, so north, east, southwest, so spaces from different parts of Brazil, to gather our resources and find ways to distribute these resources. And we found ways to distribute these resources without selecting artists, but just by creating this big and beautiful network of artists who were choosing other artists in social, economical, critical situations to share resources. Because in Brazil, literally, some artists were getting close to hunger situation without, with the pandemic, everything that was happening, especially queer and racialized artists who left their houses, had side jobs, and then they had their art jobs, and then suddenly there were no side jobs or their jobs. So it was very complicated, and I'm happy that we were able to distribute resources for hundreds of artists in Brazil throughout the years. And then suddenly we understood that we had to leave the house. We left the house. We were spiritually instructed to leave the house and follow the movement of the river to the ocean. And that's what we did. And we had this first exhibition at Ipanema Beach. Again, I know it's complicated. Rio is something else. But we did this beautiful show that is part of a series of shows that we do in December, celebrating our anniversaries, that are dedicated to the Odisha Oshun and to different issues or qualities or themes related to her, like the fluidity as an intelligence of nature, or the relationship between water and life, or about love and self-love and the politics of love, generosity and sharing as a way of ending wars and winning wars, or as we'll see, the force of the spring. This was the show we did at Ipanema, but we also did shows while we were nomadic and left the house and didn't have a new headquarters. We also did shows and programs at Galpão Bela Maré, at the Maré neighborhood, which is a big complex of favelas in Rio. Also did a show at the Modern Art Museum, in the gardens of the Modern Art Museum, and at Tropigalpão, another art space there, until we were found by this big, beautiful house, which is the new headquarters at Solar, with its first show about inspired by the idea of the spring, about something that is born, the source of life. Many different generations. Some of these works, this work at the back was shown at the Venice Biennial later. We had Marina Paris Simão, Janaína Chape, Aurora, these gorgeous artists. And this was the first time that we were able to have a space open from Wednesday to Saturday every day, and to build this big program, as I was telling you about, and working with, I don't know, Seba Calfuqueo, Elani Rodriguez. And as part of the show, we also did this gorgeous performance in a waterfall, actually close to Wellspring. I don't know, found an institution that you can do something as beautiful as this day, because there's nothing more beautiful than something like that. And then we were, with the space open, we were able to start these larger programs. This show started 1.5 years of program around the field of queer colleges, overflowing life and the desires of the world. This is Luana Vitra, who had a solo show here at the Sculpture Center this year. Patricia Dominguez, who screened this work at MoMA later. Zembo. Felipe Médici, who's the co-chair of photography at BAR nowadays. And this was probably one of the most beautiful shows. Rochelle Koshi, an artist, a friend who passed in a tragic car accident, had this work in which she collected heart sculptures for 30 years. And after 1 year of her passing, we made this show in honor of her, in which we invited our artists to submit hearts in her honor, and we literally had 400 artists, more than 400 artists from all over Brazil, making hearts in honor of her. It was this one in the middle, my friend. We're able, also part of this queer ecology program, to do a solo show by Korakrit Arunanondchai. This was the first solo show by Crit in Brazil, who's now at the São Paulo Biennial. And then after our 2 years of our 1.5 years about queer ecologists, we started this 2-year program around the idea of freedom, going back to the beginning and starting with this show about art, freedom and incarceration, ways of thinking about incarceration, and thinking about incarceration and freedom in a non-binary way. This is an Highlander who has a work at the Sculpture Center also right now. Kogo Fusco, this work is at El Museu right now. And the show happened together with the first solo show by Luis Paulino, this artist who was one of the survivors of the massacre of Carandiru. It was the largest massacre in a prison ever. And some of these works were acquired by the Pinacoteca de São Paulo, the Museum of Fine Arts of Brazil. I'm gonna skip this just in relation to time. This was a show about freedom and love, about different ways of forming, alternative ways of forming love relationships. And we still do amazing parties. We just don't make money out of them anymore, but we're still doing amazing parties. This is the current show, Castel Vitorino, in this gorgeous show about healing and freedom, understanding this relationship and the relationship to ancestrality and memory. Really gorgeous artists. I had the chance to be also growing it for the past years. And this is that first vision about the stairs, just seeing the kids with their school uniforms. And that's what we can see at Solar now, almost every day. It happened. But I'll go quickly. I know that time is running quicker than I thought, but I'll go quickly through what I've been doing at the New Museum in ISLAA. At the New Museum, I was able to do this show called Unnamed Entities by Dan Lee. Dan Lee is this Indonesian Brazilian artist based in Berlin who has developing these ways of discussing the relationship between life and death in non-binary ways, making these big installations that they conceive as entities, as living entities that are constantly dying and being born. So these flowers are dying, plants are growing, plants are dying, emotions are growing, the smells are changing, things are getting rotten. We were, of course, only able to do it at the New Museum because leadership was great, but also because this room was isolated. And the rest of the museum, we were doing this huge solo show by Faith Ringgold. So imagine like something getting rotten next to this super important work. Wynnie Mynerva, incredible artist from Peru, one of the best painters of their generation for sure, but also with a very strong practice of body modification. In this show, which was the largest painting ever shown at any museum, they decided to retell the original story of the Abrahamic religions, Adam and Eve, but not Adam and Eve anymore, now about Eve and Lilith. And in this story, Eve would take her Adam's rib out of her body and give it to Lilith. And Wynnie Mynerva actually went through a surgery to remove their Adam's rib and make this sculpture that was understood as made as a kind of a fossil or a relic, proving this story. The format of this painting, and you can imagine all the challenges in terms of fundraising process to make this huge painting happen in New York. And the format was precisely the format of a broken rib. Vivian Kakure Myers Greenberg, two artists who have never met before, and I invited them to collaborate in the show about vibrating together, what we can learn and achieve by vibrating together. Miles made these sculptures that were actual fountains. You have no idea how complicated to build this. It is and expensive. So fundraising was crazy for these two, but was amazing. And I mentioned this because I think that curatorial work, it is admin, fundraising, research, not only this, the beautiful part of the work, but also this other complicated part of the work. And we can see how their work was so much connected. The sound, I can still hear the sound by looking at these images. And Pepón Osorio, My Beating Heart, Mi Corazón Latiente, this show that I had the honor to co-curate with Margot Norton, the biggest solo show by Pepón Osorio, this incredible artist from Puerto Rico who was living in New York in the 80s and 90s, and for the past decades has been based in Philly. This was the largest solo show by Pepón ever. The title is inspired by this big piñata heart called Mi Corazón Latiente, and this was a very complicated installation. You see how the amount of details and little pieces in each of these 5 very large installations. We were reinstalling this work at the New Museum that was at the New Museum decades before. We made a beautiful publication together with these works. You see how intricate this media, multimedia installations are. This is part of the MoMA's collection. So this was a very beautiful process together with the artists and the team of art handlers and the exhibition director of the museum all of these are little screens, more screens here. So it was a very complicated also media process. Gorgeous show, and also one of the most important and gorgeous and generous artists I've worked with. And then going from a new museum to ISLAA, this was the first show that I created at ISLAA, still working at the new museum. It was a show about visions of the erotic in Latin American art. They invited me to create a show from their collection. I decided to focus on this part of the collection that was looking into forms of imagining bodies, what bodies are, or what bodies can become, etc. So a very erotic, but in an expansive way of understanding it, not sexual, but the erotic experience really of losing the borders of the body. And I made this proposal to acquire five young artists to compose with their collection. So we have David Lamelas, who's going to have a big solo show at DIA next year. Tadaskia, again, who would later have a solo show at MoMA. Carlos Mota, La Chola Poblete, who would win a special award at the Venice Biennial last year too, from Argentina. And this was my first show at ISLAA as chief curator. ISLAA had this show already programmed for the opening of the new headquarters that was very somehow Eurocentric in terms of gestures, methodologies, curated by two German artists. Gorgeous show too about the Potosí Principal Archive, but I felt that it was important to balance this first show, and then I proposed The Precious Life of a Liquid Heart, which is a show gathering artists that are living and working from cosmologies that conceive rivers not as resources to be explored, natural resources, mineral resources to be explored, but as living beings to be honored, well taken care of, etc. As their ancestors, the house of the spirits, etc. So we have Chonom Bensho, gorgeous Shipi Bokunibo artist, Nadia Taquari talking about Oshun as the Orisha of the rivers. This beautiful collective, also Shipi Bokunibo, called Soy Noma, Mujeres Moralistas Soy Noma, Seba Calfuqueo, Mapuche artist. And we're getting close to the end. Luis Fernando Benedit, this amazing Argentinian artist, part of the avant-garde movements of the 60s and 70s in Argentina. Really this generation building the field of systems art and conceptual art, Latin American conceptualism. He started his career as an architect, but also as a painter in the field of the style of the movement of concept of how's it called? Doesn't matter. But then he soon moved to informalismo, and then he soon moved into this visuality more informed by pop and surrealism, really at the same time political, but also discussing issues of the relationship of the systems inside of the body, outside of the body. Really experimental practice, making this first environments, which are installations before installations, until he started making these gorgeous artworks, this series called Habitats, which are small labyrinths made of plexiglass for animals and plants, like spiders or ants or snails, fish, really as ways of observing them, but also as learning about ourselves and what condition our choices. So a lot about freedom too, and systems, closed systems, open systems. And we had the chance to show some of these sketches. Those are all part of ISLAA's collection. ISLAA has one of the largest collections on Latin American art. It's gigantic. The archives are also gigantic. And it was amazing to be able to work with it and to make this first solo show of Benedit in New York. And we had the honor to show one of the most important works by Benedit, which is called The Invisible Labyrinth, 1970 work. It is this first uses of technology. This is a mirror labyrinth. There's only one way to reach the center without sounding the alarm. So you could see people trying out how to get to the center. In the original version, at the center of the labyrinth, there was an axolotl, this Mexican salamander, very much inspired by this text by Cortázar, etc. But also it's a long story. But we were able to install it. You can see that we could not drill this floor because this is a wooden floor. So we had to create this kind of invisible platform for the work to exist and to give stability and safety for this work. It was really, really special to see people trying it out. And last show that I'm going to talk about, and a very urgent show somehow. I'm really happy that we were able to do it. Diana Dweck is an artist. She's 4 years old, based in Buenos Aires, born in Buenos Aires to a migrant family, to an immigrant family. And she was since very, very young, engaged in activist movements. She had the chance to go to Italy and to study actually cinema. So her work is really much informed by Eisenstein, but also Pasolini, by these very cinematic kind of compositions. And since the 60s, she has been making these works that are talking about political issues, urgent political issues of her time, very directly. So this series, for example, those are some series of retrovisores, like rear mirrors in cars, in which you can see this landscape, and in the rear mirror you see a body, like a dead body, on the side of the road. This was made in a context in which literally multiple dozens of thousands of people in Argentina were kidnapped, tortured, murdered, and disappeared by the state. So she was making this work at that time. So the show was organized in two rooms. The first room really talking about this sensation of constraint, restraint, repression, oppression, with many of these works in which she uses the wire fence as a metaphor of this sensation. And then in the second room, we would have these scenes of expansion, the riots, the uprisings, with the insurrection paintings and some paintings denouncing the U.S. imperialism. This show was planned to happen precisely at the beginning of 2025, with everything that we are experiencing, to learn from the experience, from the very important experience of Latin American artists who lived and worked, found their ways to live and work in contexts with lack of democracy and human rights. More than ever, it feels really important to look at these experiences, and really happy that we were able to do it at that time. And that's pretty much it.
Wow. I feel like we all need to take a deep breath. So let's quickly jump because we're at 10 o'clock. There are 4 questions, comments. The first from SC, thank you for sharing. There's a lot of movement to your exhibitions, single day shows, changing compositions, audience interaction. What inspires you to create exhibitions that are continually changing? Also, how do you encourage interaction from people within a gallery space?
I think that the sensation of urgency is something that more than anything guides my work. If there's something that works as a background of all the exhibitions, I feel of my exhibitions and the institutions and organizations that I founded, is this idea that things could be different, and that somehow we are all responsible, co-responsible for these changes. So more than only the idea of like physical movement, I think that there is an idea of design, an idea of change, of disputing in the ideological dimension, shared values, shared norms, ideas about what is possible, what is not, and ways of inspiring new movements more than anything, not as choreographies necessarily, but more about improvisation. Yeah, I think in a few words, that's pretty much it. But I think it's really important to know that each show is a different story. It's not that every show has movement or it has the same kind of interaction, right? I think that I really think about the presence of the audience, and who's the audience that I'm engaging with. But each show is a different invitation for our relationship. It's not the same.
Okay. Okay, next. Anonymous person says, how would you start working in a community you do not know and you're not familiar with? How would you create an art community in a place where they tend not to exist?
Well, I think that the first thing I would say is that I haven't done anything by myself in my life. So I think that the first thing is for me, has been always to have a community, to be part of a community, or to have a team to collaborate. I think that's very clear in my works, that I really believe that different people, the people coming from different backgrounds, they can get together and make extraordinary gestures. So for me, creating collectives, creating teams, creating special collaborations with this belief that difference can get together and create things that are extraordinary, that are new and appropriate to a community, has always been fundamental for me.
Okay. Jenna asks, what happened to the house, Archaeology,
Yeah, so
after the pandemic and obtaining the new space? Did you ever buy it?
so Bakelage is this big, gorgeous art school, right? So this is still an art school. Liz actually is not working there anymore. There were like different directors and moments. It's not. It doesn't have this for me. It's still there. It's still an art school, but it's very different from that moment, 2015. But the house that we were trying to buy, that where we stayed for 5 years after we left, it was put in it's a long story, but it was put in an auction. We tried to buy it, and then it has different owners, and the owners are kind of sitting on the house and they're not doing anything, which is very sad. But we are now in another territory, in another part of the city that has much more to do with us, and which was very important for us also was we are in another space. It's a long story.
Okay. Next from Renee, how is ISLAA different now from its scrappy volunteer beginnings? Was the growth organic in terms of people staying engaged as it becomes more established and more money being involved?
So maybe hard for me to understand, but because maybe is there a confusion between ISLAA and Solar? I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah. So I think that's probably it. So Solar is this organization that I founded in Rio. It has a very organic, scrappy volunteer beginning. That's totally right. We didn't have a team. We had volunteers. Really, we were collective working, but little by little, we managed to have more resources, and we were able to start having a team, paying this team, and by building this very complex matrix of fundraising that I don't need to explain right now, but that involves tax deduction laws, 3 different boards, partnerships with art fairs and artists, etc. We managed to little by little. It was very slow to build this the legal institutional structure to be able to pay a team and have a robust program. I might say that we start paying the curatorial assistant up, and the directors, me and Adriano, were the last ones to be paid. So I might say that at Solar, I worked for 6 years without making any money, just working. And I only started like paying ourselves, the directors, after the first 6 years, and after we were already paying everyone. But I might say that what was really important for us to build this fundraising different situation was to make ourselves necessary, to really serve a community and show what we could do. So it took some time, but now there's a lot of people involved. You can check online, definitely, to just following us. There's a very rich program and a gorgeous genius team working there. So it's the result of work of a lot of people.
Okay, 2 more questions. Thank you so much for a great overview. What kind of room do you have to include experiential performance art with music, ritual, time-based, and site-specific art? I saw that you mentioned one by a river. I'm from the Kingdom of Barotseland, which I don't know, and I'm probably mispronouncing, in Southern Africa, engaged with a touring hybrid ritual called Kwamboka Wade in the water, looking for ways to collaborate with Brazil.
All right. So we have actually a lot of performance. I have been working with performance for a long time. I didn't show it here, but for 4 years, I founded and organized this performance festival in Rio called Venus Terra in different venues. And then after I started Solar, I stopped that. But in our program, there has always been experimental performance art, music, ritual, time-based, site-specific art, all of these. So I don't know, reach out to us, send us your material. Would love to see what you're doing and think about ways to collaborate.
Okay, and last, you bring incredible energy to the shows and the instability of environments where people are working with you against the odds. This is perhaps new to many artists from Western backgrounds, but I think we need to learn from you and your agility. Fantastic talk. Thank you. So, a comment.
Thank you, my dear. It is true. I think that I chose to focus a little bit more on Solar today, especially because of this. I think that there's a lot happening around the world, and some of the most beautiful experiences, institutional experiences, vibrant art spaces that I've seen in my life are not in the North. So there's so much to be learned from things that are happening in Latin America, the Caribbean, different parts of Africa, Southern Asia. There's so much happening in the Middle East. So I think that it's really important to, in this moment, that also the institutions here and their format is under attack, but also in crisis. It wasn't in crisis, now it's under attack. I think it might be useful and inspiring to look at how people in other places found other ways to fund institutions, to organize collectives, to support artists in situations of crisis. Like I didn't mention here, but we lived, Solar experienced 4 years of Bolsonaro government, in which we had censorship, attempts of censorship. People were afraid of showing certain kinds of things there a little bit before Bolsonaro was elected. But there was this sense of urgency too. So I do feel it's really important to learn, not from Solar specifically, because we are one of like infinite, but really to be looking at and learning from the experiences of people in the South, and also learning how to support from here these institutions from the South. Don't only learn and build yours, but learn, build yours, and help them to grow too, I would say.
Okay, with that, as one of the participants, listeners says, obrigado.
De nada.
So, okay, thanks to everyone who's still with us. Next week is our last roundtable, curatorial roundtable with Dorian Rios, and then following Tamsin Dillon, we'll be doing the artist roundtable. So please come back for those. Thank you so much, Bernardo, and we'll see you on the link with the students.
See you soon. Thank you all.